And he said, I ended up in a coffee shop at the event hotel with Craig. And he said, I sat there talking to him about Bitcoin for two and a half hours. And we finished the conversation, and I went upstairs to my room, put the key in the door, walked in, and my wife says, hi, darling, how are you? And he goes, I've had the most strangest experience. And she goes, why, what's that? And he goes, if I didn't know better, I think I've just been sitting having coffee with Satoshi Nakamoto. And she went, really? And he went, yeah, no, put it out of your head. I'm just having one of those, weird thoughts. So he said, given that experience, absolutely. Now, let me tell you, some months later, I ended up having dinner in London at Gordon Ramsay's restaurant in Grosvenor Square with Jon Matonis and his wife. And she told me the same story. Unprompted. Yeah. So anyway, bottom line is I organised a neutral venue, and there was myself, there was Craig, Jon Matonis, and one other who I won't name because I think it would be unfair to do so. But it wasn't O'Hagan, I can tell you. O'Hagan wrote with authority on these proof sessions, but he was at none of them. Yeah. Anyway, the deal was that Jon could select any 3 blocks at random from the first 10. And Craig would sign with the key related to each one of those 3 blocks a private message. So that's what occurred. Sure. And then there was probably an hour and a half of discussion around a whole lot of things about, why and circumstances in his life that saw him step away from the from the Satoshi role, and a few other things. And they discussed also the meeting that they had in Sydney a couple of years earlier. And then Jon came back to me and he said, Stefan, you need to get a couple more people to see what I've seen. And I said, yeah, I'd be happy to do that. But, got to remember, Jon did this under very strict non-disclosure provisions. And that was the deal, because Craig didn't want any information leaving that room. It was critically important to him that any information that he provided to the world was provided in a time of his choosing, under circumstances of his choosing. So, Jon was okay with that. And one of the people that Jon referred me to was Gavin. Now, sure. Interestingly, Jon asked me, once I met him in the Boost Juice Bar, he asked me to confine all communication via Hushmail. And sure. I set up a Hushmail account, and all of my communication with Jon from that point on was via Hushmail. And he provided me an introduction via Hushmail to Gavin. And then Gavin said, Gavin and I then picked that up, and we went back and forth a number of times. We may have even spoken on the phone once, but I can't be certain of that at that stage. But Gavin and I did ultimately speak multiple times on the phone, but I just can't remember where in the sequencing of things. Sure. But Gavin said immediately that he would if proof was available, he would want to see it. But he said, 1, I don't like flying. 2, I'm not going to come to London on a wild goose chase. So for me to get on a plane and come to London, I would want to be sure in my own mind that I was going to see something legitimate. And I said to him, that's a fair call. I would probably think the same thing myself if I were in your shoes. I said, what is it that you're looking for? And he said, well, Stefan, I interacted with Satoshi a lot, and there are things that only Satoshi would know about the communications that I had with him. Therefore, I want to be able to talk to Craig and interact with him. And I want to satisfy myself that he's got knowledge about things that only Satoshi Nakamoto would have knowledge about.
Sure.
So Craig agreed to that. And I left them. I provided them the communication links. And I have no idea what information they switched back and forwards. But about 5 days later, Gavin came back to me and said, I'm ready to come to London. and I said to him, what is it that has caused you to come to that conclusion or that position? And he said, because stuff that I've been discussing with Craig, no other people in the world know that material apart from me and Satoshi. So ultimately, he came to London, and I met him. I booked a meeting room at the hotel where he was staying in central London. And again, it was myself, Gavin, Craig, and one other person that were in that room.
Was it the same other person, or was it a different other person?
No, it was the same other person. Okay. And Gavin read and signed a non-disclosure and agreed that whatever happened in that room was not going to leave that room.
Right.
And then he was given the same choice as John was, to select at random any 3 blocks from the first 10 and to dictate a private message that Craig would then sign. And that's what happened. And actually before that, the two of them sat side by side opposite me at a table, and they continued, obviously, the dialogue that they'd been having that I wasn't privy to. And Gavin's asking, well, I've never figured out what this was intended for, and I never figured out why you did that. And Craig's got a pencil and paper, and he's writing fucking equations and doing all this stuff. And I sat there for about an hour, and in the end I went, guys, can we get the job done? And you guys can go back to your love fest after. Right? So the proof was done. And then Gavin sat there for a minute, and he put his hand in his computer bag, and he pulled out a USB stick. And he said to Craig, I want you to put your keys on there, and I want you to do the same proof on my laptop. And Craig went, no way, mate. I'm not doing that, because you and I both know as soon as I do that, you pick your laptop up and you go off wherever else you go off in the world, and you've got traceable, identifiable information that I don't want you to have. Right. And the agreement was this stuff doesn't leave the room. You walk out of here with your laptop, it leaves the room. And Gavin said, well, promise. And Craig went, you can promise all you want. It's not going to happen.
Promise. That's adorable.
And then I sat there, and, Gavin's going, well, I need, because he said, I walk out of this room and I say I've seen what I've seen. And it's not that I don't believe what I've seen, but I say I've seen what I've seen. Everyone in the world is going to say you've been conned. And they're going to look for every which way to say that you've been conned. And he said, if it's done on my machine, I know my machine is not doctored in any way. Mm-hmm. So there was a bit of heated debate for about 15 minutes. And then I said, what about this? We pick up the phone and we call one of the office staff and tell them to go down to Dixon's and buy a laptop. Craig, you can say what specification, and you say, I don't give a shit, just any laptop. I just want to run Linux on it. Okay, right, okay. So we'll get someone to buy this laptop, hot-footed over here to this room. They can deliver it to you, Gavin, and you can check it, that it's authentic packaging, it's never been opened. And that's what happened. This laptop was delivered about 2 hours later. Gavin cut it, opened it, all the plastic wrapping sealed, opened it, took everything out of the box. He sat there and run it up, and he connected it to the hotel Wi-Fi. And then Craig did the same proof on that. The deal was, though, that at the end of the demo, Craig would take that laptop home.
Sure. Yeah.
It was his responsibility to secure the information that he wanted secure. Not mine, not Gavin's, not the other third party. And that was the deal. So that's what happened. Now, the interesting thing was when the phrase was typed in to sign, there was a spelling error in it. So when Craig hit enter, the proof failed.
Yeah, it doesn't, right.
And Gavin looked at Craig, and Craig looked at Gavin, and Craig looked at me, and Gavin looked at me, and I went, "Oi!"
Right.
And then Gavin's looking at the screen. He went, "Craig, that's not correct. There's a spelling error." So corrected it. Boom, success. So they did three proofs, and then Gavin sat there. In all honesty, Gavin sat there, looked at the table for a few seconds, and shook his head, and he said, "In all honesty, I've thought about what I would do if I ever came face to face with Satoshi. Not that I ever thought it would happen, but I thought, what would I do?" And he looked at Craig and he said, "Craig, every time I've thought about it, I've come to the same conclusion." And the man stood up, put his hand out, and he said, "All I want to do is say thank you." Now,
fascinating.
if you've ever seen grown men cry, it happened at that point in that room. Craig cried. Gavin looked like he was going to cry. I'm sitting there going, "Oh, Jesus, I've got tears in my eyes." But that's what happened on that day. And then we met for breakfast the next morning at the hotel.